A news release has indicated that Air Canada will be adding an additional flight into Jamaica based on the current situation affecting Cuba. And so I want us to talk about Cuba, tourism, the other Caribbean islands, and we'll see where we go with this. But of course, I have to start by expressing my deep felt concern with the situation going on in Cuba. It is different when you on simply from an observer standpoint. But Cuba for me has been more than another Caribbean island, a place on the map, somewhere to speak about. Cuba has infused itself into my world since I started in the tourism industry on the North Coast. And just for context, even before I gave Cuba a thought, Cuba sought me out in a very interesting way. In the early 1990s, when I began working in Boscobel in St. Mary at the then Boscobel Beach Hotel, there was a climate of Cubans coming to the resort because Super Clubs, the owner of that hotel, had started their own property there in Cuba, in Baradero. And being the only not Cuban, sometimes I don't even remember who I am. Being the only Spanish speaker on property and one of the few in the chain, I was tasked with the responsibility of receiving the Cuban staff members who were sent to Jamaica. And that's a stir in itself, because the persons who I received first, I remember one was a financial controller, and there were some other middle managers who came on the trip. They came under the guise of work exchange, but it was really a reward trip. However, the situation in Cuba did not permit for those lofty holidays. And so what Super Clubs did was have it set up. They would come, they would check into the hotel, and their assigned positions would be whatever they were doing in Cuba. Really and truly, they just presented themselves and were ready for a vacation. It was also a way to remunerate them with additional spending money that could not happen while they were in Cuba on a fixed income. And might I just say, in the 90s, their average income was 15 US per month. Now, this might be a longer video than I had intended because setting up the background is very important. I remember taking them out shopping, and that was my first entryway into what life in Cuba was like, looking at life through their eyes. And so, being a Jamaican who had lived in Spain, who had traveled extensively throughout Latin America, Central America, and we did not have the big malls and shopping areas, and so I knew what it was like going somewhere and seeing loads of things to dazzle my eyes. However, nobody prepared me for the reaction that I got when we took them into a supermarket. It could have been Rexo in Otrius at the time. And while I just wanted to breeze through and show them the products that we have, they were fixed at certain places. And one of the places that the ladies stopped and lingered was at the sanitary napkin female care area. And they were oohing and eyeing, and I was in total confusion. Who oohs and ahs over sanitary products? Who does that? That was the beginning of my education. And that education had a deep-seated impact on me, even to today. And so while they were looking at the different brands and what the different offers were and the benefits, they were literally picking up these sanitary napkins and saying, this for my mother, this for my sister, this for auntie. And I'm like, are you serious? You are going home with gifts of sanitary napkins for your ladies. And then the men came over and they also got into the shopping and they were excited. And I was no longer confused, but extremely curious. Now, fast forward to early 2000s when I became the Spanish liaison officer for Tourwise, and there was a contract with Cuba on my first trip to Cuba, and this now would be me getting into the country for the very first time with all kind of curiosities. I could not believe it when I saw walls without paint, long stretches of road where we were the only vehicle on that road. I was wondering what on earth was happening. You see, my westernized mind had not converted to what life was supposed to be. It's always one thing to hear it, totally different thing to see it. And so as we got into Kayakoko, which was a resort island, I couldn't understand that either. I could not understand that nobody lived on the island. They were all bussed in from Abila along a long causeway to get to and from work each day. It was very, very strange. Remember, living and working in the tourism area in Jamaica meant that you are minutes away from work. And to believe that persons would have to travel over an hour, maybe two, can't remember, but they had a long commute to and from work blew my mind. And so being in Jardines del Rey and Calle Coco, we saw the standard resorts, we saw the standard offerings, we saw the standard fare. But somehow the eyes of the people did not show the merriment that danced on the lips and the smiles of our Jamaican tourism workers. It caught my attention and I began asking questions. To be sure, Cubans are proud people. They do not want anyone to look down at them. They do not want you to feel sorry for them. One of the things that struck me was they were always very clean. They were always well put together. And there was nothing about their presentation that suggested lack. Their laughter among each other was high-pitched and infectious. But there was this grayness to their eyes that I couldn't quite understand. It was not until we started to develop some sort of a relationship, the chief accountant for that company that invited us, that they opened up a little bit and began to get deep down and honest with life as they live it. That's when I learned about rations. Never heard about that before. That's when I learned that you are given an allocation of a certain amount of basic food by the state for the month. Now, if it lasts for the month or if it runs out early, that's up to you. You stand your hand. In Jamaica, we say, wait, Marga, it pop. And literally, that was the situation that faced them. One telling moment, however, which will stay with me for a very long time, was us going to a restaurant to eat off property because we did stay in an all-inclusive resort. But we went off for site inspections and stopped at a restaurant. And I think we had a delegation, and these people who were with us were the senior people in the company. So we could have been 6 or 8 strong. Myself as a translator, the officials from Tourwise, and then other persons. And I remember looking on the menu, and they all spoke English. Some of them spoke French as well. They're multilingual persons. And so during the menu, coming from the background of living in all-inclusives, living a lifestyle that I did not realize was so lavish. I had access to everything. There was nothing you could name that for me was without or outside of my reach. I lived on property. I ate what the guests ate. I was a concierge VIP agent. And so, what were we talking about for upscale foods? Lobster and shrimp and, I don't know, steaks. Nothing for me spoke opulence because I had access to everything. So nothing on that menu at that restaurant in Cuba caught my attention. And I had a decent sized breakfast at the hotel. I wasn't hungry. There was a lot of eggs included in that particular menu. And I could not envision myself having egg for lunch. Nevertheless, the insistence was order something, try new things. And I guess because being the translator, I needed to have animal. I needed to seem interested. I needed to motivate the Jamaican contingent to order lavishly from the menu. And because I was resistant, I remember one of the ladies who sat right beside me pulled me closer and she said to me, if you don't order, we can't order. And I was like, what do you mean? She said, we cannot enter this restaurant or any restaurant of this type unless we are accommodating dignitaries. So at that moment, I discovered I was a dignitary. I specifically remember she was encouraging me to have this dish that included eggs and cucumbers, and my imaginary taste palette did not see those two going down very well, particularly because they do not use pepper, not the way we use hot pepper. And so between what egg is, which is raw, and cucumber, which has that taste that can leave you feeling a little bit off if you don't have it in right combination, I did not want to be feeling upset in my stomach. And she said to me, "Brother, try it. If you don't like it, I will eat it." And she looked straight into my eyes, and I heard exactly what she was not saying. And so I got my entire team to become very animated. And I told them, come on, let's order. We have never been here, and the food won't go to waste, which is always my concern. Our colleagues say they don't mind eating our mouth water, just to put it lightly, so that there was no thought of indiscretion. And I say all of that to say my first experience with the Cuban reality, it jolted me into a reality check that I never ever thought that I would experience. And it changed many, many things in my outlook from that day going forward. One of the things that always surprised me was the amount of Canadians vacationing in Canada. What am I saying? In Cuba. Hi, Canada, Cuba, two seas. What can I tell you? And it was very interesting having lived in Canada, and I tend to find Canadians a bit on the picky side. And so I wondered, how is it that they so happily go to this country that even though the resorts are, looking like resorts should look and fully staffed, and for the most part, their buffets are as buffets should be, you don't have to look far to see the lack. If you close your eyes tight, 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 you might not see Cuba, but it's hard. And so it always bothered my mind, particularly because being Jamaican and functioning in the all-inclusive space in Jamaica, when Cuba, I keep messing up my C's, oh my goodness. when Canadian vacationers come to Jamaica and they start to nitpick. This is not an attack on Canadians because, hey, those who know my story know my story. But I was always very curious about them being so very specific about so many things when they're in Jamaica. But plane loads of them go to Baradero, go to Havana, go to Holguin, go to Santiago de Cuba, or donde sea, wherever, yeah? I always found it interesting. That's all I'm saying. So, this situation has occurred. And although Canadians were still vacationing in Cuba, the announcement about 2 weeks ago that pilots would not be able to refuel if they flew into Cuba, that news meant a halt to Canadians and generally tourism on a whole to Cuba. There are those who would say, oh, more Jamaican properties will get these flights, these travelers. And so my conversation wants to start itself at, we're not comparing apples to apples. And I think one of the reasons why Cuba is so beloved by the Canadian traveler in particular, I don't think it has much to do with the culture. I really don't even think it has much to do with the type of service that you get at the all-inclusives in Cuba. Because honestly, having stayed there, there was no heart. I am not knocking Cuba, guys. Don't get it wrong. I'm very honest. I tell it like I see it. The service is functional. That has been my experience. People do their jobs and they speak multiple languages. They will smile, but it's not from the heart. And this is not criticizing who they are. It is saying that they are performing a job. Comparing it to the Jamaican, you cannot go into the average Jamaican all-inclusive or tourism related entity and not be greeted by big old smiles and belly full sounding laughter, and people are just happy. And it has been said a million thousand times that Jamaicans are just the happiest people. That's what is presented at work. If we were to go into a discussion about Jamaicans and who they really are, that might be a different story. But in context, when I stayed at several properties, because I have stayed in Caicoko, I have stayed in Holguin, Santiago, all of those have all-inclusives, and I have been privileged to have stayed in these areas. One thing was the same every single where. The service was functional. There was no heart in it. There's no love. And I had to understand the culture and the situation and getting into what life is like when they hang up their aprons, for want of a better term, and go back home. Reality check is very, very different. And so I could only imagine even the thoughts that Westerners are able to fly in and have a wonderful time and enjoy the best that their country has to offer, but they can't. And that's the reality. That's just the honest reality. And so even as a Caribbean national visiting another Caribbean country, the response to me was the same. The body language spoke of, you are so lucky. You can get on a plane and you can leave. And you can sit in a restaurant and you can lie in a bed in my country in a fancy hotel. The only thing I can do as a multilingual speaker, as a trained doctor, chiropractor, scientist, working as a bartender, a front desk attendant, a room steward, is to serve some other people. It's rough. And so I base that as the premise on which I speak. And just to say that with the Canadians going to Cuba, the price was right. And so with all that's happening in Cuba, and I base my conversation on Canadian simply because Air Canada suggested diverting those seats to Jamaica, the price is going to be astronomically different. And I am not exaggerating. And this is going to definitely be a two-part event. And I say astronomically different because based on the statistic from the Jamaica Tourist Board, 70% of our hotel stock is now available, but we have lost months of business. We have lost billions of dollars in revenue. The cost per client per stay has already increased. I should know. This is what I do. I do all of these bookings for my clients, and the rates have increased. That's just the reality. Post-COVID, there were those who said Jamaica was expensive. Can you imagine having survived an onslaught from Hurricane Beryl and now Melissa, along with other environmental issues and global and regional differences that I shall not even speak of here? Everything affects pricing. And so I'm going to end this video here by saying the Canadian who comes on that particular Air Canada flight, anticipating that their prices that they were privy to in Cuba will somewhat be similar to that they get here in Jamaica, I will tell you very, very quickly, it will not be. And let us put value to cost. You will have no shortages in Jamaica. I guarantee you. You will have no power outages at your resort in Jamaica. I guarantee you. You will have fresh fruits and vegetables all the time in your resorts in Jamaica. I guarantee you. You will have smiling faces from the heart in Jamaica. I guarantee you. You will have those sweet talkers who will want to marry you tomorrow. Guaranteed in Jamaica. Your all-inclusive experience, your tours, your experience in Jamaica will be full of heart, full of personality, and you will go home with warm memories. That, my friend, you cannot put a price tag on. So consider traveling. Don't cancel your trip. Jump on that flight that will be repositioned to Jamaica. But know that all things Caribbean are not created equal. You know, Sheri has lots to say, but I'm going to catch it right here for now. Until we meet again. Ciao.